Welcome, this is Simply the Truth with me, Doug Harris. Welcome, because you are more important, or as important, shall I say, as those of us here in the studio. I have to say that because I've got Julian Thomas with me again today.
Hello.
Is anybody more important to you? Of course they are. But
lots of people are more important than me, that much I do know.
Great to have you with us again.
Thanks so much.
Last time, we were due to start this series when you were with us a few weeks ago now. Mm-hmm. But we looked at the whole area of community and work in the community at that point. We're going to take a whole series on Jesus, and we're going to start by looking at the whole area of is he a historical figure? Mm-hmm. And I think this is vitally important. I think there are two things that are important here as I see this programme. Number one is that as Christians, we know and we can communicate. Mm-hmm. Number two, we're able to communicate that to people that say he's a myth. He was only that. But maybe one of the first questions to really ask is, I mean, what's history and how do we get it? I mean, we always talk about history, we always talk about being historical, but what is history and how do we get it?
Well, I mean, it's simple, isn't it? History really is that which deals with the past. And essentially, for us, it deals with characters, it deals with villages and towns and what people did and how they went about their lives. It's of great interest to us. I think the Brits have got a real thing for history, more so than almost anybody in the world. You know, you've got buildings which you're not allowed to touch and do anything with because they're listed one way or another because they're historical buildings, you know. Sometimes that's a retrograde step, I think. But history is simply that which deals with the past. It's a subject that it deals with events and places, countries, but especially people. Where do we get it from? Well, it's really quite simple where we get history from. People who are involved in what was going on have sat down and said, today, this happened, you know, and it's written down. So history is really basically what happened in the past, and somehow or another the message has got through the ages to us, and we can read and say, oh, that's how they did it, you know.
I guess there's always a problem, and we're going to talk about certainly the accuracy of history in a bit, especially concerning the Bible and that. But I guess there's always a problem when you read somebody says this happened, somebody says that happened. That's okay. When you read comment on it, how do you begin to work out what you can rely on, what you can't rely on, what was good, what was bad? I mean, how do we begin to sift this through? I mean, just talking in general terms about history, because the way we're going to approach biblical history is going to be the same criteria. But in general terms, how do we begin to sift through that and work it out, Jules?
Okay. I want to say, first of all, as well, that the important thing about why we feel this is important to our faith is because without Jesus, the historical Jesus, none of this works. It's not the same for other faiths and religions. If you took Buddha out of the scheme, Buddhism would still work. Even if you took Allah and Muhammad out of the scheme as a prophet and God, the teachings in Islam would still work. But with regards to Christianity, without Jesus, it doesn't work because he is our salvation. He paid the price. He has done the work. He said, it is finished. I have done it. So without Jesus, our faith doesn't work. That's why this is so incredibly important to us. How do we measure then what's good and what's bad?
That's right.
Well, at the end of the day, you get verification. All the stuff that's been happening in London a few weeks ago will be verified by different sources. I was watching the news when it was on, and all the newscasters around the world were talking about it, and they were all saying the same things. So there's verification.
But that's recent history.
It is,
and that's perfectly. You can go back, see the newspapers, go back just a few weeks, see the news, etc. When we get back, because obviously when we're talking about the historical Jesus, we're talking about a few years ago, before I was born anyway. Only just, yeah. But so how do we verify that where we can't go to the newspaper, we can't go to the TV clip, when we get back that far, how do we start working this through?
It's not easy. There's a bit of detective work to do. For all ancient documents, it's the same. It's not just Jesus, but you go back, 1,500, 2,000 years, it's difficult to piece things together, but it can be done. When you're talking about the big events, wars and country against country or whatever, what you find is that those accounts are usually written by the winners. Okay, so that some of that stuff is a little bit more difficult to get your head around, because you usually get a one-eyed view on it. But when it comes down to things like this, people, just normal Joes on the street, people that other people didn't regard very highly at the time, and let's not forget that Jesus wasn't very highly regarded at the time. He had a few followers in a little country that was fairly insignificant in a Roman Empire. Okay, so what happens is that for those smaller events, for smaller towns, villages, people write things down. And then what you find is that the neighbouring village will write things down as well. And then they'll say, hey, there's something special happened in the village next to us, okay? And then that might overflow into neighbouring districts and even neighbouring countries if the thing that happening is famous enough. And you begin to get a picture from all these different writers. Now, those outside of Jesus' followers didn't like Jesus very much. Okay, so most people who would have written about Jesus after the time that he was doing involved in his ministry in Palestine, would have not liked him very much and would have been quite negative about what he was doing and what he was there. But nevertheless, he was written about. His followers were written about for hundreds of years afterwards in different cultures. If you read the book of Acts, for instance, you will find that very early on there were already 2 or 3 different cultures involved in the early church. Obviously you had the Jews, the Jewish culture was where it all began, but it very quickly overflowed into different cultures. Romans were getting saved, Greeks were getting saved. If you read Acts chapter 2, you will see that a whole range of people from all over the world were there for that particular festival, when Peter famously stood up and delivered that message, and they spoke in tongues of men and delivered messages in tongues of men, and they all went away all over the known world. So Christianity had spilled out into many different cultures very quickly, and would have been written about.
Okay, now you're talking about the Bible there, and you're saying the Bible says this, the Bible says that. One of the things, of course, when you come down to Jesus, and I will often say this, is I will see the Bible as a historical document, not obviously just a historical document, but the Bible is a historical document. And one of the things I often do if I'm talking to people like this is say, I want you to look at that as a historical document, first of all. But how can we say and how can we know that the history of the Bible is accurate? How can we know? We're not trying to prove it's the Word of God. What we're saying is, how do we know that the events in there, which you've quoted and we talk about, how can we trust the accuracy of them?
Same way as you can trust the accuracy of other ancient documents talking about other ancient people. You test it against other documents of the same period, and you find out if it's talking about the same types of thing. If you had a famous king, I mean, people like Pontius Pilate and Herod aren't just biblical characters. These were well known in that area, in the district, in that part of the world. In the Roman Empire, these people would have been famous in the Roman Empire. So their names crop up all over the place. So then you start saying, so the Bible isn't just mythology. The Bible isn't just for faith. It's actually based in something, because we can compare what it says historically to what other people say who have got no religious axe to grind, that actually these people did exist. Okay? And then I'm not a historian, as you know, Doug, okay? But other people are historians, heavyweight historians. There was a guy called Sir William Ramsay, who was a really heavyweight historian. And he, in fact, he's widely recognised as one of the greatest archaeologists of all time. He's probably the father of archaeology. He was convinced that Acts, the book of Acts, was seriously flawed historically. And Luke didn't exist, and he swallowed all these common trends that were going around on his time. So he set himself a task, like so many people do. I love it when people do this. I'm glad I'm not intelligent. The Lord got me early, But these guys, this Sir William Ramsay, father of archaeology, deeply intelligent man, went after Acts to disprove it. And he says, when he found out what he found out, this is what he says. He became convinced not only that Luke did in fact write Acts, but that he was, and I quote, an historian of the first rank. I'm reading this, okay? This is not by memory. An historian of the first rank who should be placed along with the greatest of historians. He eventually concluded that you may press the words of Luke to a degree beyond any other historians, and they stand the keenest scrutiny and the hardest treatment. So what did Sir William Ramsay do? What he did was he tested it the way he would test other historical documents, and that's the conclusion he came to. This is history. So says a heavyweight, and many heavyweights will say the same thing. This is accurate, proper history that we're talking about.
You see, I always feel that we need this information. Every Christian needs to get this information, because so many people will say, this is a load of rubbish. There are so many things in there. How could you believe that? And yet what we've got to come back to them and say, basically, is how can't you believe it? Now, whether you want to believe it, whether you want to respond to the message that's in there that says, you need to be saved, and we can be saved. Whether you want to do that or not, that's different. But what you cannot say is I can just ignore that book. Because so many people, as you say, have looked at it, have checked it out, and through history. I mean, you've got facts here. You can go up to the British Museum, and you can see people that is talked about in this book, yes. and the events that are talked about.
That's right, yeah. So it is accurate, it is proper history. You see, the mistake that most people make, and it's an understandable mistake, is that they see this as a book of faith. Therefore, you can take it or you can leave it, and it's not provable one way or the other. It's like every other religion in the world. It cannot, it may be or maybe not this or that or the other. But actually, the fact that it is steeped in history, and not just the time of Jesus, not just the New Testament times, but the whole of the Old Testament is based in history. Things are happening that can be verified by archaeological digs, by other historical documents around and about the place. So it can be verified. It is totally verifiable. And it's important that it is.
Well, absolutely. And it's important that we know that. And it's important that we come to this conclusion. Because once you accept the Old Testament is historically correct, you've then got to accept that actually Jesus does exist, because they talk about him there. They tell you what's going to happen to him. Right. They tell you where he's going to come, where he's going to be born, what he's going to be doing.
And of course, you're ready for the next step then, because what I find is the people who say to me it's very doubtful that Jesus even existed are the very people that wished he didn't, because they want to carry on in their way of life and not be challenged by that. But because we can prove that he was around, because we can prove the Bible is historically accurate, then we can move on to the next step and actually talk about the person of Jesus. Well, if Jesus existed as a person, as a historical character, for want of better words, what does that actually mean to us?
Yes.
So we can move on. That's why it's important, because, as I've just already said, Jesus did the work.
Yes.
If he didn't exist, he didn't do the work.
Yeah.
If he didn't do the work, then we're still all lost. We're all fools, you know?
And it is, isn't it? Because if Jesus existed, he has a message. And I have to then come and say, well, okay, what does that mean to me? How do I respond to that? But tell me, we're talking about the Bible, because is full of Jesus. I mean, that's the whole centre. He is the centre. But are there other historians of the time? Are there others that actually wrote about Jesus as well, contemporary to Jesus or soon after?
Yes, certainly there were a number soon after. I can't express the importance of the fact that first and foremost, the Bible is an historical document as well. Most of what we learn and know about Jesus is learned from there, but it's kosher, it's fine to do that, because it's not just a book of faith. It is a book of faith, but it's not only a book of faith. It is deeply historical as well. But yes, there were others that wrote. I've given a list to myself here. The most famous one was that, in fact, people think he was a Roman historian, but in fact he wasn't. He was a Jewish historian, Josephus. His name was Flavius Josephus, which I guess is why people think he was a Roman, but in fact he was a turncoat. Yeah. And he was born in AD 37, so just a few years after the mission that Christ brought. And he wrote some things about Christ and about Christians. Some of his writings have been called into question because of some of the things that are apparently in there that people think that were written afterwards. There's no proof of that. There's no proof that what he wrote was right either. But yes, Josephus would have written, I didn't put the date down, but there you go. He wrote possibly, I think, AD 70, 80, 90 sort of time. There was a guy called Cornelius Tacitus, who was a Roman. He wrote in AD 112. He wrote about Christ, he wrote about the Christians. There were several others as well.
But I think the important thing here is that there are other historians, and if we were dealing with anything else other than the person of Jesus, people would go and look at these historians and say, because they said this, it was the way it was done, these were the people there. The moment it comes to Jesus and they don't want to believe it, they put a question mark in it. But that is just wrong, because in these guys, they are saying, the Bible, a clear historic document, gives us so much information. All of these guys looking on, seeing Jesus, maybe criticising him, maybe, as you said earlier, not for the good, but that's not the issue. The fact that they criticise him proves that he was there, proves that he was saying things that people need to criticise.
Not a hint in any of these historical documents, secular historical documents, not a hint that this Jesus didn't exist. Not a hint. Even some of the Suetonius, I think, was the other one I was about to mention, which is obviously another Roman writer. Not a hint in any of these writings that Jesus didn't exist. Now, Suetonius didn't, I don't think, wrote actually about Jesus, but he wrote about the Christians.
Yes.
But if you wanted to bring the whole thing down, he would have started saying these Christians are deluded. They were following a man that didn't exist. But he never did that. You see, none of the historians outside of the Bible, none of the historians even hinted that Jesus didn't exist. So it's really a nonsense to even suggest that that's the case, to be honest.
And the very point that we made at the beginning, which is why I wanted to make it, of what history is, these people are factual people. Yes. They're not making it up as they go along. They are saying, we saw this, we heard this, this is what we were told. And they are talking about Jesus as a real person. They are talking about Christians and how it affected in the Roman Empire, willing to die in areas like that.
And we know that most independent historians down through the ages will write down what they see and what they hear. Unless you're state-run and the state's telling you what to write down, as we spoke about earlier on about the winners writing the history, most historians, people like Pepys, okay? Pepys is fairly up to date compared to the stuff we're talking about, but nobody was looking over his shoulders and saying, you write down this. He was writing it for his own memoirs, and these things are being dug up and these things are being shown, and that's where you get the truth of the matter, you see. And these guys were the same. They weren't state-run. These guys were independent and wanted to write things down for their own perhaps their own family, for years to come, that people could read them and look back on things and see an accurate history of what was going on. They had no axe to grind, really, at the end of the day. They just wanted to write down what they saw, because they had a historian's heart, if you like. That was their skill, you know.
And are you saying with absolute confidence, Julian, that we can believe that Jesus is a historical figure, just as, say, we believe Alexander the Great, Julius Caesar, whoever else you want to mention? There is not a shadow of a doubt that he was a historical figure that did, as far as outside historians, at least some of what's written in the Bible. The outside historians don't say everything, but at least some. There's no doubt about that.
No doubt. There is no doubt. If you were to follow the same rules as when you interrogate and look into other historical documents and other historical writings, if you use the same rules as Sir William Ramsay did, you will have no doubt either. Use the same rules of interrogation, and you will come to the conclusive proof, really, that the history is good in the Bible.
I think I know the answer to this question, but I'm going to ask you anyway. Why then do people still insist on denying that Jesus Christ lived, died, rose again, and said the things he said? Why do they still insist on doing it?
On doing what?
On denying the fact that it was there.
Probably a whole range of different answers to that. I think the main one has got to be a spiritual one, because if Jesus did all the things that he said he was going to do, all the things that the writers of the Gospels wrote that he did, all the things that Paul wrote in his letters, and Peter and John and Jude and all the rest of these books that we've got. If Jesus did all those things, and all those things are factual, then we need to be thinking slightly differently to the way we're thinking about our lives. We need to be letting God in. We need to be taking Jesus seriously. And again, I would say that as a church, we need to be getting the message across to people, because most people think that God is sitting on a throne with his big white beard and a big stick, waiting for them to fall so he can crack them across the legs with his stick. Now we need to change. We know that God is a God of judgment, but we need to get the fact out that God is a God of love as well. And in fact, God is love, because people don't want this God that's in their minds. That's why they don't want this to be true, because the God that's in their minds is going to spoil all their fun. Well, you know, I've been a Christian for 28 years. I have had more fun in those 28 years than I could ever have had before. All I did before was go out, get drunk, fall over, don't get a girlfriend, you know, go home, wake up with a headache, start all over again. That's not fun. What I've been doing for the last 28 years, that's fun. Involved, you know, involved in community, involved with people, involved with family, getting involved in all sorts of different things, from music to acting to preaching to teaching to travelling up here to be involved with you, getting involved in conferences and conventions. I wouldn't have done that unless I started following Jesus. But it was the real Jesus, you see. Yeah. Somebody presented the real Jesus. Yeah. So we need to start presenting the real Jesus to people, not this one that they've got, this monster they've got in their minds of somebody waiting for them to fall, ready to punish them.
It is, isn't it? Because if you read the scripture, if we believe it's a historical book, you read the revelation of God. He is a God of love. He is a God that cares, and a God that's willing to actually get into your life.
Yes,
do you feel
some historical fact?
Absolutely. Yeah. do you feel that sometimes as Christians we're almost apologetic about the Bible and about Jesus, instead of coming out with this fact that we know it's true, we know it's real because, that we're almost, well, of course, yeah, we can't mention the Bible to people because they wouldn't believe it. Do you think that's a problem with some?
I think it is a problem with, shall I say, rank and file Christians, people who fill the pews every week. They haven't got the courage of conviction to be able to confront people when they say something wrong. And maybe, Doug, this is our job as apologists, excuse me, evangelists, leaders in our church, to start noticing where people's failings are and start to get into that area of their life, start teaching into it, start getting involved in those areas, and start teaching people that, in fact, it's not as difficult as it sounds, you know, to say something to somebody. Because people who don't believe in God have such contrary opinions to ours. We don't need to get into a battle every time, but all we need to do is, from time to time, say to somebody, well, actually, I don't think that's right, you know. I think it's like this. And it does. I think what we do to scare ourselves is think this is going to turn into a full-blown debate with somebody who knows much more about it all than I do, when in fact the truth of the matter is that most people have heard a phrase and will regurgitate it at you because you're a Christian, and they know nothing about the phrase that they've just thrown out at you. So what we need to do is teach ourselves up on certain aspects of this subject matter so that we can say, actually, that's not true. This is true. And 99% of the time, the person you're speaking to will back off because they've just regurgitated something at you they know nothing about.
Yeah. Great. Bless you, Julian. It's been great to talk to you for the last half hour or so.
Bless you.
What we're clearly saying is that Jesus is real.
Absolutely.
And because he's real, it really does mean we've got to face it and face what he believes. May that be the case. Face it, the real Jesus, and see what he can do to change your life. Bless you. See you again next week. Bye for now.